Good morning, everybody. Last week, we spent some time looking at the Ten Commandments. Looked at a couple different things, such as what it really means to take the Lord's name in vain. One of the particular things we spent time looking at was how most of those commandments carry over into the new covenants. There's still commandments that are applicable for us today, with one notable exception, though. We're told explicitly in the New Testament that we are not to allow anybody to judge us in the observance of a Sabbath. In other words, the Sabbath day is not a requirement for us today in the Christian church. And while we do worship God on a particular day, that day being Sunday, that's actually not connected to the Sabbath either, in contrast to a lot of popular perception. It's a different thing entirely. However, there are some things left unsaid about the Sabbath from last week and how it factors into the New Testament. And so I want to take some time today and look at where the story of the Sabbath starts, what God intended for its meaning to be, and whether it does have any relevance at all for us as New Testament Christians. And that story actually begins all the way back in Genesis chapter 2. I'll read here from Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. After God has completed his creation of the earth and of humanity, here we read, "Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation." Now, it's rather amazing when you think about it that today, almost the entire world is still counting their weeks in sevens. This is a tradition that goes all the way back to the creation of the earth, the very beginning. And whether people realize it or not, in doing so, in observing the 7 day week, they are commemorating the way in which God made the heavens and the earth. When Genesis 2:3 says that God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, it means something like God set the seventh day apart to have divine meaning. The idea of working for 6 days and then entering into a divine rest on the seventh day is something that God intended to echo down through the centuries and into eternity. And so here, as creation begins, everything is in harmony. And I think you could say, in a manner of speaking, that all of creation at this time enters into God's rest as he is resting on the seventh day and enjoys God's rest. Because here, God's rest isn't really just about the cessation of labor. For after all, Adam and Eve still have jobs to do in the garden, and God's not checked out. He's going to continue to do things in the world. Um, However, what it means is that everything is now peaceful, everything is complete, everything is perfect, and as yet still unblemished. Now, I think we can all relate to the idea of needing rest. It's something we intrinsically understand as human beings. We can draw practical lessons from it. And when I think of rest, I think often of some of the struggles that my brother has gone through. He struggles with rest a lot. He's a mild insomniac. And he's tried all sorts of different solutions throughout the years, different sleep schedules, blackout curtains, sometimes melatonin. And when he talks about this, my mother's canned response to this is to say, the best recipe for a good night's sleep is a clear conscience. And that saying, I don't think ever helped my brother very much get more sleep. But part of what my mother was expressing in that statement is that there's more to relaxing and having rest than just lying down in bed or having a physical rest. There's something more to it than that, and it's about having peace in your very soul. That's more relaxing than anything else that you can have. And in the same way, I think when we read about God's rest, we're supposed to feel the sensation of something bigger than just not working for a day. It's being free from strife, being safe from harm, and being secure from doubts and confusions. Adam and Eve had all of those things at the beginning in the Garden of Eden as they were enjoying God's harmony and benefiting from how he rested from his creation. Now, perhaps they could have continued that rest forever except that, as we know, Adam and Eve did not stay content to remain within God's rest. They chose their own way, and they ended up introducing strife, harm, and all sorts of confusion, doubts, and sin into the world. And at risk of me over committing to this metaphor, it's at this time that God, in a sense, has to go back to work. From my point of view, it kind of looks like God had more work afterwards trying to fix the damage that humanity had done than he ever had to put into creating the world for those first 6 days. Now, we don't have time to examine all the work that God did, for example, with Abraham and Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, but suffice it to say that God begins unrolling a lengthy and deliberate plan to help humanity once again in the future enter into his rest. One of the major stages along that plan is the law that is handed down through Moses to the Israelites. In the words of Galatians 3:24, the law was a tutor, teaching people God's ways and leading them towards God's rest in the future. We see a great example of this in Exodus 16, very early on in the story of Moses and the Israelites, when God's people are in the wilderness traveling on their way to the promised lands, and God begins teaching them in a very tangible and practical sense about his rest through the tradition that we know as the Sabbath day, the seventh day. If you're reading along, we'll be in Exodus chapter 16, and we'll read from verse 1 all the way through verse 30. Now the Israelites set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the people of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month, after they had departed from the land of Egypt. And the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the people of Israel said to them, Would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full. For you have brought us into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. And then the Lord said to Moses, Behold, I am about to rain bread from heaven for you. And the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them, whether they will walk in my law or not. On the sixth day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily. So Moses and Aaron said to all the people of Israel, At evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against him. For what are we that you grumble against us? And Moses said, When the Lord gives you in the evening meat to eat, and in the morning bread to the full, because the Lord has heard your grumbling, that you grumble against him, what are we? Your grumbling is not against us, but against the Lord. And then Moses said to Aaron, Say to the whole congregation and to the people of Israel, Come near before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling. And as soon as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation, they looked towards the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. The Lord said to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the people of Israel. Say to them, At twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God. In the evening quail came up and covered the camp, and in the morning dew lay around the camp. When the dew had gone up, there was on the face of the wilderness a fine flake-like thing, fine as frost on the ground. When the people of Israel saw it, they said to one another, What is it? For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, It is the bread that the Lord has given to you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather it, each one of you, as much as he can eat. You shall take each one omer, according to the number of the persons that each of you has within his tent. And the people of Israel did so. They gathered some more, some less. But when they had measured it with an omer, whoever had gathered much had nothing left over afterwards, and whoever gathered little had no lack. Each of them gathered as much as he could eat. And Moses said to them, Let no one leave any of it over until the morning. But they did not listen to Moses. Some left part of it till the morning, and it bred worms and stank. So Moses was angry with them. Morning by morning they gathered it, each as much as he could eat. But when the sun grew hot, it melted. On the sixth day they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers apiece. And when all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, he said to them, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, the Sabbath day, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake, and boil what you will boil, and all that is left over lay aside to be kept until the morning." So they laid it aside until the morning, as Moses commanded, and it did not stink, and there were no worms in it. Moses said, "Eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the seventh day, which is a Sabbath, there will be none." On the seventh day, some of the people still went out to gather, but they found none on the ground. And the Lord said to Moses, "How long will you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? See that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, on the sixth day, he gives you bread for 2 days. Remain each of you in his place. Let nobody go out of his place until the seventh or upon the seventh day." So the people rested on the seventh day. Now, honestly, the reaction that we see here out of the Israelites are pretty understandable for people who have been wandering in the desert in the desert. I can't say it, in the desolate wilderness. You have no house, you have no farms where you're going to be able to obtain food week after week. You don't really know where your next meal is going to come from, and you don't have any idea where you're going to be a year from now. When you see food, it's natural to do anything you can to hoard it for yourself and make sure that you can provide for yourself and your family in the near future. And there's probably a few of us who are like that even today, even though we live in a time of peace and plenty. I definitely have some prepper tendencies myself, I'll admit. I have quite a few boxes of MREs and mountain houses stashed away in the cupboard, and I even keep a couple buckets of rolled oats around, just in case the fall of civilization occurs and I can live out all my unrealistic fantasies of living a rugged and self-sufficient life in the post-apocalyptic wastelands. But of course, the problem with the Israelites' tendency here is that they aren't self sufficient. They're not supposed to be. They are slaves, completely unable to save themselves or provide for their own families. And the only reason that they're here in Sinai, in their own freedom, is because God has provided that for them. And God is the only one here who's able to take them further on their journey and bring them into the promised lands, to be able to bring them to a greater rest. That's the goal here. The Israelites need to learn to trust that God will continue to provide for them because God is taking them on a new adventure. He's taking them to Canaan, to their inheritance, to a land, in the words of the Bible, flowing with milk and honey. And they're not going to be able to get there on their own. They can't defeat the Canaanites on their own. They don't know how to build a nation on their own. They don't even know the way to get there. And so, here in the wilderness, God is taking a crucial step in trying to teach them to trust Him. He is teaching them to let go of control, to let go of their hoarding and their selfish tendencies, and to come humbly to enter into God's rest, which only He can provide so completely and so abundantly. And they just can't bring themselves to do it. From the first time that they start gathering the manna, which is clearly provided miraculously by God, they see that if they gather too little, God makes it enough for them. And if they gather too much, God reduces it to exactly what they need. And so Moses instructs them, don't hoard it. Don't trick yourselves into thinking that you can provide this for yourselves. God gave it to you, and God promises to give it to you tomorrow as well. So whatever you have left over, let it go, trust in God, and God will send more in the morning. And the people just don't trust Him. They hoard it, and God continues to let it spoil in the morning to try to teach them to walk in His ways. And this is where the teaching comes in. God says, I want you to keep this seventh day as holy to me. It has special meaning. I want you to do no work. I want you to learn to trust me to take care of you on the seventh day when you can do nothing for yourself. And so, in preparation for this special day, gather twice as much. I will give you that food to keep for food on Saturday, but you will gather no food on that day. And what do the people go and do? They go out Saturday morning anyways. They just can't bring themselves to trust in God. And God speaks of this chronic unbelief in this incident and similar incidents out in the wilderness in Psalm 95, verses 10 and 11, saying, "Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as at Meribah, as on the day at Massah in the wilderness, when your fathers put me to the test and put me to the proof, though they had already seen my work. For 40 years I loathed that generation and said, they are a people who go astray in their hearts, and they have not known my ways. Therefore I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest." Now, what rest is God speaking of here? He's not speaking of the Sabbath day that he refused the people to enter in, because even this evil generation will continue observing the Sabbath till the last days of their life. He's speaking of entering into the promised land, the land of Canaan. This is the generation which, under Moses, they were so chronically disobedient, they so chronically distrusted God, they accused God of trying to kill them and said that they would not follow Moses into Canaan. It is this generation whom God finally allowed to have their own way and closed the promised land to them. And thus, God says here in Psalm 95, they shall not enter my rest. Again, this concept of God's rest is a bigger idea than just not doing labor. Indeed, the future generations who did enter that promised land still had to till the land and work with their own hands in order to provide a living for themselves. Entering God's rest really means entering God's peace and God's blessing. It means not having to worry about the future, not having to figure out how to do things on your own. And that's exactly what the first generation of Israelites refused to do, whether that meant trusting God to provide manna on the Sabbath or trusting God to bring them safely into the promised lands. And of course, we have the exact same lesson to learn today. For us, it's not about resting on the seventh day or entering into the land of Canaan. The New Testament tells us that those physical examples have passed away. And the place that we're trying to get to now is heaven. That's our promised land. And we get there in exactly the same way as the Israelites, by trusting God fully to take care of us. When a person today says, "I'm a good person, I'm sure that God's going to let me into heaven," or they say, "Jesus was just a good teacher and I don't need to follow an organized religion," they're making a similar sort of understandable yet destructive mistake that the Israelites made in trying to gather manna for themselves on the Sabbath. We are every bit as dumb and incompetent and helpless as the Israelites under Moses. And we don't know how to get to heaven on our own. It's just not something that we have the capability to do. We're only going to get there if God takes us there. I'm not going to get there by hoarding the good things of God unto myself, and I'm not going to get there by following my heart and doing it my own way. I just don't have the understanding and I don't have the capabilities. I will only get there by doing what God tells me to do. In the old days, God gave his instruction book, so to speak, of how to get there through Moses, through the old law. And he made it clear that doing it any other way would not get the Israelites to the promised lands. And today, God has given us our instruction book through Jesus Christ, which we call the New Testament. And likewise, he makes it clear that there is no other way, saying, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me." The formula is exactly the same, even if the physical aspects of the religious practice look different. We get to the promised lands by doing what he has told us to do and not by following our instincts, which tell us what we want to do. And of course, this is the message of the book of Hebrews, which we've been studying in the morning class. Turn with me, if you're following in your Bible, to Hebrews chapter 3. We'll read from Hebrews 3:12 all the way through chapter 4, verse 11, where God makes this very connection for us, connecting the typological tradition of the Sabbath day to the eternal rest that can only be found for us by following Christ. Starting in Hebrews 3:12, we read, "Take care, brothers, lest there be in any of you an evil, unbelieving heart, leading you to fall away from the living God. But exhort one another every day, as long as it is called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. For we have come to share in Christ, if indeed we hold our original confidence firm to the end. As it is said, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion. For who were those who heard and yet rebelled? Was it not all of those who had left Egypt led by Moses? And with whom was God provoked for 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, but to those who were disobedient? So we see that they were unable to enter because of unbelief. Therefore, while the promise of entering his rest still stands, let us fear lest any of you should seem to have failed to reach it. For good news came to us, just as to them. But the message they heard did not benefit them, because they were not united by faith with those who listened. For we who have believed enter that rest, as he has said, as I swore in my rest, or as I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest, although his works were finished from the foundation of the world. For he has somewhere spoken of the seventh day in this way. And God rested on the seventh day from all his works. And again in this passage he has said, they shall not enter my rest. Since therefore it remains for some to enter it, and those who formerly received the good news failed to enter because of disobedience, again he appoints a certain day, today, saying through David so long afterwards in the words already quoted, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. For if Joshua had given them rest in the promised lands, God would not have spoken of another day later on. So then there remains a Sabbath for the people of God. For whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works, just as God did from his. Let us therefore strive to enter that rest, so that no one may fall by the same sort of disobedience. So having read that, for us, what is the Sabbath rest that remains for the people of God? It's clearly not the Sabbath day, as you don't have to strive to enter the Sabbath. You don't have to strive to enter a Sunday morning worship assembly either. In context, what he's talking about is the promised land. You have to strive to enter the promised land. And yet, is it Canaan? Is that the promised land he's talking about? No, for Hebrews 4:9 says that if Joshua had been able to give the people ultimate rest in the physical land of Canaan, there would have been no need to speak of another day later on. Instead, our promised land is heaven, the only place where we can reside with God, find eternal peace, and most literally enter into his rest. Jesus was very aware of how important this idea of rest was for the people of God. And so, in this vein, in Matthew 11:28 through 29, he offers this. Come to me, all of you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, because I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Now, we could speak of so much more on this topic if we had time. But one of the best parts of the rest that Jesus is offering us is that it's not only for the distant future, it actually begins today. There's always going to be labor in this life, there's always going to be work and difficulty, but there's peace and comfort and rest for our souls right now if we are in Jesus Christ. Jesus' yoke, he says, is light. He takes care of those who are his own. And if you're ready to stop doing things by your own instincts, if you're ready to trust God and let him lead you into his promised lands, Hebrews 3:13 says that day is today. If that's your situation today, we would love to help you be obedient to that goal. The message is yours today as we stand and sing.